She was only 17 when her own parents decided it would be easier to bury her name than admit what they had done to her baby. That was the truth behind the smiling Christmas cards and polite lies her parents fed the family from their brick house in Toronto after forcing their daughter to surrender her newborn and disappear. 20 years later, several relatives at a summer family reunion would go completely still when the daughter they had mourned walked in beside the grown child her parents had erased. Before we get into this first half of a story that honestly made me angry even while I was telling it, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen a family hide a scandal by destroying one person's name to protect their own image? Right, I'm here. And tell me which city in Canada you're watching from. And for everyone who already liked and subscribed, may God make your burdens lighter, open better doors for you, and keep you safe. Thank you for being here with me. Now, let me tell you how my own parents erased me while I was still alive. My name is Elena Whitmore, and I grew up in Scarborough, in the eastern part of Toronto, in one of those quiet neighborhoods where people notice everything but pretend they don't. The lawns were always cut, the bins were always rolled out on time, and every driveway looked like a competition for who could appear the most respectable. My parents loved that kind of life. They loved neat appearances, church on Sundays, stiff smiles for neighbors, and the kind of reputation that made people say, "The Whitmores are such a good family." What they did not love was anything that made them look less than perfect. I learned that early. My mother, Esther, had a way of controlling a room without ever raising her voice. She would look at you over the rim of her mug, lower her tone, and somehow make you feel like you had already disappointed her before you even spoke. My father, Dominic, was different. He could be louder, colder, more direct. When he was angry, the whole house changed temperature. Even the sound of his footsteps carried pressure. I was their oldest child. After me came my younger sister, Eloise, who was the golden one without ever having to ask for it. She was polished, pretty, careful with everything she said, and naturally understood how to keep my parents happy. Then there was my younger brother, Connor, who floated through the house with the comfortable privilege of being a son. Even when he messed up, it was always framed as a phase, a lesson, a boy figuring himself out. But when I made mistakes, they became character flaws, signs of weakness, evidence that something in me had always been defective. By the time I was 16, I had already learned how to make myself small. I helped with dinner. I watched Connor after school. I cleaned the kitchen before my mother came home from work, so she would not start pointing out what I had missed. I said yes before being asked. I apologized even when I did not fully understand what I had done wrong. Outside the house, I was different. At school, I laughed more easily. I had one close friend, Eva Morrison, who lived 3 streets over and never seemed intimidated by anyone. She used to tell me, "One day you're going to move downtown, cut your hair, and stop saying sorry every 5 minutes." I would laugh and tell her she watched too many movies. But secretly, I liked hearing someone describe a future where I belonged to myself. Then I met Brandon. He was 18, worked part-time at a sporting goods store near the mall, and had the kind of easy charm that makes a girl who is starved for kindness feel seen for the first time in her life. He had dark hair, a crooked smile, and a way of listening that made me feel like what I said mattered. At least that is how it felt in the beginning. He would wait for me after class sometimes and walk me toward the bus stop. He asked about the books I liked. He joked about leaving Toronto and driving all the way to Vancouver just because he was sick of winter. He told me I was smarter than most people around me and that my family probably did not appreciate me enough. When someone names your loneliness that accurately, you mistake it for love. I was 17 when I got pregnant. Even now, I can still remember the exact second I knew. I was standing in the tiny washroom at the back of a Shoppers Drug Mart, staring at the test in my hand while my whole body went cold. I kept blinking, like maybe my eyes would change the result if I looked hard enough. They did not. I was pregnant. I sat on the closed toilet lid afterward with the little stick still in my hand, and all I could think was, my parents are going to destroy me. Brandon did not react the way I hoped he would. At first he acted shocked, then quiet, then irritated. He kept rubbing the back of his neck and saying things like, "We need to think clearly," and "You know my parents will freak out," and "This is really bad timing." Within a week, he was already talking less like a boyfriend and more like someone negotiating an inconvenience out of his life. Maybe there are options, he told me one evening in the parking lot behind his work. I looked at him. You mean for me? He exhaled slowly. Elena, don't do that. Do what? Make me the villain when I'm trying to be realistic. That was the first time I saw how easily he could move the blame away from himself. I remember hugging my coat around me because the wind was sharp and dirty with leftover March snow. I'm pregnant too, Brandon. I don't get to be realistic from a distance. He looked at the ground. I'm saying we're too young. No, I said quietly. You're saying I'm on my own. He did not answer. That silence told me everything. I hid the pregnancy for as long as I could, which was not very long in a house like mine. My mother noticed before I told her. She noticed I was sick in mornings. She noticed I stopped finishing meals. She noticed my jeans no longer fit the way they had 2 months earlier. She watched me for 3 days with that cold, narrowed look of hers before cornering me in the kitchen after Connor had left for hockey practice and Eloise was upstairs. What did you do? She asked. My stomach dropped so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter. I don't know what you mean. She stepped closer. Don't insult me. I said nothing. Her face changed first, then her voice. You stupid girl. My father came home 10 minutes later to find me crying at the table and my mother pacing near the sink like she had been personally humiliated in public. Dominic did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask who the father was. He did not ask what I wanted. He asked one thing. Who knows? I looked up at him through tears. What? Who else knows? He repeated. The question hit me harder than any yelling could have. Not are you safe? Not are you scared? Not what do we do now? Just who else knows, because the first thing that mattered to him was not me. It was containment. Eva, I whispered. And Brandon. My father swore under his breath. My mother folded her arms. You are not telling anyone else. I stared at them. I'm still your daughter. My father's expression did not change. Right now, you are a problem that needs to be handled carefully. That sentence stayed with me for years. From that night on, the house no longer felt like a home at all. It felt like a waiting room before a punishment. My mother took my phone more often. My father drove me to appointments without explaining where we were going until we arrived. Brandon disappeared almost completely. When he did answer messages, they came hours later and sounded like formal replies from someone trying to avoid legal responsibility. I told myself, maybe my parents were in shock. Maybe after the first wave of anger, they would calm down. Maybe once the baby came, something in them would soften. I still had that kind of hope then. It embarrasses me now, but back then hope was the only thing that kept me from collapsing. They took me to a private clinic in North York one rainy afternoon. My mother had told me to wear a loose sweater and keep my head down. I remember the waiting room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. No one smiled. No one explained anything clearly. Papers were passed in front of me. Forms were signed. Words like confidential and placement and future stability kept appearing in conversations around me like they belonged to some other person's life. I did not fully understand the machinery already moving around me. I only understood that decisions were being made faster than I could breathe. A woman with short gray hair and a soft voice came out to speak with my parents, not me. I heard phrases through the half-open door. Given her age, best interests, clean arrangement, no extended complications. Complications. That was what my baby was becoming in their language. When the woman finally spoke to me directly, her voice was too gentle, like she had learned that softness makes cruelty easier to sell. Elena, you have options, she said. I looked at my mother standing beside me, stiff as stone. The woman continued, there are good families who have been waiting a long time to welcome a child. Families who are stable and ready. My baby isn't a gift basket, I said before I could stop myself. She blinked. My mother's voice came sharp and low. Enough. I looked at the woman again. Do I have to do this? No one answered immediately. That silence was answer enough. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. My parents told relatives I had gone to stay with family friends outside the city, because I was struggling emotionally and needed privacy. That was the first lie. Small enough to pass. Respectable enough not to invite follow-up questions. Eva tried to see me, but my mother turned her away twice. The third time she came by, I heard them through the front entryway. "I just want to talk to Elena," Eva said. "She's resting," my mother replied. "It's 3 in the afternoon. She's not in a state to entertain visitors." I almost came downstairs. I almost ran to the door. But my father was standing in the den with the door cracked open, and all he had to do was glance toward the staircase for me to freeze. After Eva left, he came upstairs and stood in my doorway. "Do not create more drama," he said. I stared at him. "She's my friend." "She is a witness to your stupidity," he replied. "That is not the same thing." I turned my face toward the window so he would not see me cry. The baby moved for the first time in late summer. I was alone in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed, when I felt a tiny flutter low in my abdomen. At first I thought I imagined it. Then it happened again, softer than a heartbeat but real enough to stop time. I pressed both hands to my stomach and started crying instantly. That was the moment my baby became real in a way fear had not allowed before. Not a scandal. Not a secret. Not a consequence. A baby.
Mine.
I whispered, "Hi," like I was introducing myself. For the first time in months, I smiled. Then my mother opened the door, without knocking, and found me there. "What are you doing?" she asked. I wiped my face quickly. "Nothing." She looked at my stomach and her mouth tightened. "Don't get attached to something you cannot keep." I have replayed that line in my mind more times than I can count. There are cruel things people say in anger. Then there are cruel things they say calmly. The second kind leaves a much deeper wound. By the 7th month, my parents had moved me into the basement for comfort and privacy. That was their phrasing. In truth, they did not want neighbors or extended family friends dropping by and seeing me through the front windows. The basement was half finished, cold even in September, and smelled faintly of concrete and laundry detergent. There was one small window high near the ceiling. If I stood on the bed and leaned, I could see a slice of sky. That was when the isolation became total. Meals were left at the top of the stairs sometimes. My mother no longer sat with me unless it was to hand me documents or remind me what would happen after the birth. "A clean break is best," she would say. "For who?" I finally asked once. "For everyone. Not for me." She gave a thin, tired sigh. "You are 17. You don't know what's best for you. I know this is my baby. And I know you're emotional and confused." There it was. The language of erasure. Calm, polished, impossible to argue with, because every response I gave was treated as proof of instability. I stopped speaking after that. One afternoon, while my mother was out and my father was at work, Eloise came downstairs. She leaned against the doorframe in a new sweater I knew my mother had bought her the week before. She looked uncomfortable, like she had been sent on an errand she did not want, but did not dare refuse. "How are you?" she asked. I laughed bitterly. "You've lived in the same house as me for months, and that's what you're asking now." She flinched. I didn't know what to say. "You could have said something before." She looked down. "Mom and Dad said this was for the best." "For who?" "Elena."
No, tell me.
"For who?" She would not meet my eyes. "For the family." I should have expected it, but it still hurt. "So that's what I am now. A threat to the family?" She said nothing. I stared at her and understood something awful in that moment. Even if she felt sorry for me, she was never going to stand beside me. Eloise loved comfort too much. Approval too much. She would not risk being pushed out with me. Before leaving, she placed a folded baby blanket on the chair by the wall. Yellow, soft, clearly new. My throat tightened. "What is that?" She shrugged awkwardly. "I bought it." "For what?" She swallowed. "I just thought." She did not finish. After she left, I picked up the blanket and held it to my face. It smelled like the mall, like new fabric and store perfume and a life where sisters shopped together without secrets. I kept that blanket. It became the first thing I ever saved for my child. Near the end of the pregnancy, my father started receiving phone calls he took outside or in the garage. My mother became more anxious, checking the front curtains, reminding Connor not to mention me at school, telling Eloise that if any aunties called, she was away. The lie was growing, stretching, becoming something that needed maintenance. One evening, I was in the basement bathroom when I heard my parents arguing upstairs. Their voices carried down through the vent. "This can't drag on," my mother hissed. "I know that," my father snapped. "What if one of my sisters asks to see her at Thanksgiving? Then we say the doctor advised against visitors." "And after?" There was a pause. Then my father said something that made the room tilt around me. "After, she'll be gone. We tell people there were complications. We keep it simple." I froze. My mother did not object to the lie itself. She only asked, "Do you think that's too extreme? Do you want questions for the next 20 years?" Silence. Then, quietly, my mother said, "No." My whole body started shaking. I pressed my hand over my mouth so they would not hear me, but a sound still escaped, something between a gasp and a sob.
Gone.
Complications. They were planning to tell the family I had died. Not moved away. Not cut contact.
Died.
I stumbled back into the basement and sat on the floor by the bed, both hands wrapped around my stomach. My baby shifted inside me as if responding to my panic. "I'm here," I whispered through tears. "I'm here. I'm still here." That night, I did not sleep at all. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed exactly where I was, they would write my life for me and then erase it. But knowing that and escaping were not the same thing. Because where would I go? I was still pregnant, still broke, still scared, and still trapped in a house where every move was monitored. That was how my world began to change. Not with some brave, cinematic moment, but with the sickening realization that the people who were supposed to protect me had already started burying me in their minds. And I had no idea how much worse they were about to make it. If you've made it this far, tell me honestly, what is worse to you, a family member who betrays you openly, or one who smiles in public while quietly destroying your life behind closed doors? I'm really curious what you think because that kind of fake respectability can be terrifying. The day my labor started, Toronto was buried in one of those ugly November rains that make the city feel gray all the way through. Water ran along the curb outside the front of the house, and the bare trees in the neighborhood looked almost black against the sky. My contractions began just after dawn. At first I thought it was false labor because the pain came low and tight, then eased off. But by 8 in the morning, I was doubled over beside the basement bed, breathing through waves that stole my voice. I called for my mother twice before she finally came downstairs. One look at my face, and she knew. "It's time," I whispered. She did not comfort me. She did not touch my shoulder. She turned around, walked upstairs, and called for my father. They drove me to the hospital in silence. I remember the windshield wipers beating back and forth. I remember my father gripping the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles whitened. I remember my mother in the passenger seat checking her purse twice, making sure she had papers, insurance cards, something folded in a legal envelope. I was in the back seat, breathing like I had seen in prenatal pamphlets, trying not to scream. At the hospital, things moved fast. A nurse named Francesca took one look at me and immediately became the first kind face I had seen in months. She had warm brown eyes and spoke in a steady voice that cut through the panic. "Okay, sweetheart," she said, helping me into a wheelchair. "You're doing fine. Just breathe with me." I almost started crying just because she called me sweetheart and meant it kindly. While she checked my vitals, she asked questions directly to me, not my parents, and for a few minutes I felt like a person again. "How far along are you?" "Almost 39 weeks. Any complications?" I looked toward my mother. She answered before I could.
No.
Francesca glanced at her, then back at me. "And how are you feeling?" Scared, I wanted to say. Alone. Like no one in this room is on my side. Instead I whispered, in pain. She squeezed my hand. "That part, I can help with." My parents stayed close during the early hours, but not in a loving way. They hovered like supervisors, making sure a process stayed on schedule. At one point, I heard my mother asking a staff member in a low voice where the social worker was and whether the adoptive family representatives had been informed. Representatives. That word made me sick. The labor lasted 16 hours. By evening, I was exhausted beyond anything I had ever known. Pain had stripped me down to something raw and animal. There were moments I truly thought I would split apart from it. Francesca came and went, always calm, always encouraging, wiping my forehead with a cool cloth once when I started shaking. "You're stronger than you think," she told me. No one in my family had ever said anything like that to me. Close to midnight, when it was finally time to push, my mother stood stiffly by the window, and my father waited outside the room because hospitals made him uncomfortable. I remember begging for water. I remember gripping the rails so hard my palms hurt. I remember screaming once and seeing my mother's face tighten with embarrassment rather than concern. Then all at once, the room changed. A cry cut through everything. Thin, furious, alive. My baby. My baby. I turned my head, frantic, desperate.
Please.
Please let me see. Francesca wrapped the baby quickly and brought them close enough for me to see a tiny scrunched face, damp dark hair, and a clenched little fist. My heart stopped and restarted in a completely different rhythm. It is impossible to explain what that second did to me. Love was not a strong enough word for it. Recognition came closer. It was like my body and soul both said at once, "There you are." "My baby," I sobbed. Francesca's expression shifted. She looked toward my mother, then back to me. Something passed across her face, something like understanding mixed with sorrow. "Just for a moment," she murmured. She placed the baby against my chest.
Warm.
Small.
Real.
I kissed the side of that tiny head and cried so hard I could barely breathe. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm your mom. I'm here." My mother stepped forward almost immediately. "That's enough." Francesca did not move right away. For one beautiful extra second, she let me keep holding my baby. Then the moment was gone. Everything after that became a blur of pressure, signatures, exhaustion, and emotional violence, so polished it barely looked like violence at all. The social worker came in around 1 in the morning, carrying a folder. She had kind eyes and a professional tone. She explained things I could barely process. Temporary placement, consent, revocation periods, procedures, stability, best outcome. I heard the words, but they would not settle in my mind. I had just given birth. My body was shaking. My chest ached because my milk was already coming in. I could still smell my baby on my skin. "I don't want to do this," I said weakly. My mother's tone became gentle in that fake way I knew too well. "Honey, you're overwhelmed." I looked at her. I said, "I don't want to do this." My father, who had come back in by then, stepped closer to the bed. "Elena, stop making this harder." Harder. As if the problem was my resistance, not what they were doing. The social worker hesitated. "Legally, she does need to understand." "She understands," my father said. I found my voice again. "No, I don't." He leaned closer and lowered his voice, so only I could hear. "You have nowhere to go. No money. No diploma finished. No father stepping up. You think they'll hand you a baby and let you walk out into winter? Sign the papers and stop humiliating yourself." That was how he did it. Not by shouting. By reducing me to practical impossibility until love itself sounded childish. I cried until my head hurt. I asked to hold the baby again. They said maybe later. Later never came. At some point, half drugged from exhaustion and pain, I signed where they told me to sign. Even now, that memory lives inside me like a wound that never healed correctly. The next morning, when I woke, the bassinet was gone. So was the baby. I sat up too fast, and pain tore through my abdomen, but panic was stronger. "Where is my baby?" I asked the empty room. When no one answered, I pushed the call button with shaking fingers. A different nurse came in and tried to soothe me, but I could see instantly she had been briefed already. Her face held that careful expression hospital staff use when they are trying not to say the wrong thing. "The baby has been transferred to the nursery temporarily," she said. "For what?" "For routine care." "I want my baby." She did not answer directly. I started crying again. My mother arrived 20 minutes later in a cream coat and lipstick, as if she were visiting someone after brunch instead of standing over the daughter she had just helped break apart. "Please bring my baby back," I said. She set her purse down on the chair and sighed. "Elena, don't start. Don't start." My voice cracked. "That's my child." She looked around, irritated by my volume. "Lower your voice." I could not believe her. "How can you do this?" Her eyes went cold. "Because someone has to think beyond the drama of the moment." I stared at her in horror. She continued, "A stable couple is waiting. They can offer that child a real home. You cannot." I shook my head over and over. "You didn't even let me try." She gave me the same answer she always gave when power needed to be turned into reason. "Trying is not the same as being capable." That sentence nearly crushed me because part of me, young and terrified and trained to doubt myself, almost believed it. Before leaving the hospital, Francesca came to say goodbye. She stood by my bed for a second longer than necessary, like she wanted to say something she could not fully say in front of my chart and my family and all the rules around us. Instead, she slipped something small into the drawer beside the bed while my mother was in the hallway. After she left, I opened the drawer. Inside was a folded hospital card with my baby's birth information stamped on it and a handwritten note on the back. "For your heart. Don't let anyone tell you this child was never real." I pressed the card to my chest and sobbed. That card became the second thing I saved. The first was the yellow blanket Eloise had left me. The second was proof that for one moment, someone in that hospital had seen me as a mother. When I was discharged, I did not go home to recover in any real sense. I was transported back to the house like a problem being returned to storage. My body hurt everywhere. My breasts were swollen and painful. I was bleeding. I could barely sit comfortably. And still, no one treated me like a person who had just given birth. My basement room had been stripped of almost everything related to the pregnancy. The small stack of pamphlets was gone. The prenatal vitamins were gone. Even the extra pillow I had used to support my back had disappeared. My mother had removed all evidence with terrifying speed. I stood in the middle of the room, holding the hospital card in one hand and the yellow blanket in the other, and suddenly I understood the full shape of what they intended. Not just to take my baby, to wipe the whole thing clean. 3 days later, I learned how far they were willing to go. I came upstairs slowly that morning because my stitches hurt and I still felt weak. My parents were in the kitchen. Connor had left already, and Eloise was at school. The radio was on low. My mother was making tea. My father was reading something at the table. For one insane moment, the ordinary look of the scene made me angry enough to feel dizzy. How could the world still look normal in a house where mine had ended? My father glanced up. "Sit down." I remained standing. He placed a folded document on the table. A bus ticket. Some cash. A typed page. "What is that?" I asked. My mother answered this time. "You'll be staying with a church contact in Kingston for a while." I looked from her to my father. "What?" My father's voice was flat. "You cannot stay here." I laughed once in disbelief. "I just gave birth. And the situation has been handled," he replied. "Now we move on." I gripped the back of a chair. "Move on? You took my baby." My mother inhaled sharply. "Do not phrase it like that." "How should I phrase it?" She stood straighter. "You were given help out of a terrible situation." I stared at her. "You mean you took my child, and now you're throwing me out?" "Lower your voice," she snapped.
No.
The word surprised even me. My father folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside. "This emotional performance will not change what's happening." I felt my whole body trembling. "Where is the baby?" He did not answer. I stepped toward him. "Where is my baby?" His eyes hardened. "You no longer have the right to ask that." I think that was the moment something in me finally cracked for good. Not because the pain was new, but because the cruelty had become so clean, so confident, so complete. My mother picked up the typed page and held it toward me. "You need to understand that for the family to recover from this, there has to be a clear narrative." I frowned. "What narrative?" She hesitated, and in that tiny hesitation, I knew whatever came next would be monstrous. My father said it instead. "We've informed people you had severe complications after delivery." I went still. My mother added quickly, "We did not give unnecessary details." I could barely hear them through the roaring in my ears. "What are you saying?" My father looked directly at me. "To the extended family, Elena, you are gone." No scream came out. No dramatic collapse. Just absolute, blinding disbelief. My mouth opened, but no sound came. My mother continued in that same controlled voice, as if explaining table arrangements for a wedding. It was the only way to stop gossip, questions, speculation about the baby, everything. "This ends the matter permanently." I stared at her face, searching for some sign that this was a sick joke. There was none. "You told them I died," I whispered. My father's reply was colder than winter. "As far as they need to know, yes." I backed away from the table. My knees actually weakened. I had to catch myself against the counter because the room tilted violently for a second. "You buried me," I said. My mother's eyes flashed with irritation rather than shame. "Don't be dramatic." I looked at her, and something in me hardened in a way that had never happened before. "No," I said hoarsely. "You don't get to say that to me again." For once, both of them looked surprised. My father stood up. "Enough. You'll take the bus tomorrow morning. There's money in the envelope. Do not contact relatives. Do not come back here. And for everyone's sake, try to rebuild your life quietly." Quietly. They wanted me alive enough to disappear, but dead enough not to disturb them. I went downstairs and locked the basement door for the first time in my life, even though the flimsy lock barely meant anything in that house. Then I sat on the bed and cried until my throat burned raw. Around sunset, Eloise came home. I heard her footsteps pause outside the basement door. A light knock. "Elena?" I wiped my face and said nothing. The door opened anyway. She stepped inside slowly, still in her school coat, her hair damp from sleet. The second she saw my face, hers changed too. "What happened?" I laughed bitterly. "Ask Mom." She closed the door behind her. "I did. She told me you were going away for a bit." I stared at her. "Did she also tell you they told the family I died?" Her face lost all color. For the first time, I saw genuine shock in Eloise. "What?" I repeated it, slower this time, because sometimes cruelty becomes more real when you hear it twice. "They told the family I died." She sank onto the chair by the wall.
No.
"Yes. That's insane." I looked at her tiredly. "And yet here we are." She pressed both hands to her mouth. For a second I thought she might finally be on my side. But then she whispered the same thing everyone in this house always whispered before surrendering to our parents' will. "What are you going to do?" Not "how do I help?" Not "this is wrong." Just "what are you going to do?" As if even now the burden of survival belonged entirely to me. I looked away. "I don't know." She sat there a long time without speaking. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm sorry." It was the first apology anyone in that house had given me in months. But it was too small and too late to stop anything. The next morning I left before sunrise. Toronto was freezing. The sidewalks were crusted with dirty snow, and my breath came out in thin white clouds as I stood at the curb with one duffel bag, the yellow baby blanket, the hospital card, and an envelope with cash my father had counted out like severance pay. My mother did not come outside. My father carried my bag to the trunk, then drove me to the bus station without a word. Halfway there, I finally asked, "Did you ever even think about what this would do to me?" He kept his eyes on the road. I thought about what needed to be done. I looked out at the city, at the streetcars and storefronts and people hurrying with coffee cups in their gloves, at ordinary life happening all around me while mine had been cut in half. "You don't get to call yourself my father anymore," I said. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. At the station, he took my bag out, set it down beside the bench, and handed me the envelope. "Do not make contact." Then he left.
Just like that.
No hug, no regret, no hesitation. I stood there alone, 17 years old, bleeding, grieving, and alive in a world that had already started speaking about me in the past tense. I did not end up in Kingston. That part of their plan failed, because Eva found me first. I had used the payphone in the station washroom to call the only number I still knew by heart other than my own house. Her mother answered. I almost hung up from panic, but then Eva got on the line, and I broke down before I could even explain. 20 minutes later, she was there. She got out of her mom's old car wearing a red scarf and fury written all over her face. The second she saw me, she ran forward and hugged me so hard I nearly fell apart in her arms. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Elena." I clung to her and cried into her coat. She pulled back just enough to look at me. "You're coming with us." I shook my head weakly. "My parents." "I don't care what your parents said. They'll come after me. Then let them try." I had never loved anyone more in that moment than I loved Eva. Her mother, Francesca Morrison, had always been one of those women who made a house feel warm before you even stepped all the way inside. She lived in East York, worked long shifts as a school administrator, and had none of the polished cruelty my mother called dignity. When Eva brought me to their home, Francesca did not ask for a perfect explanation before helping me. She took one look at me and said, "You need soup, rest, and a doctor, in that order." Then she brought blankets. I slept in Eva's room for 3 nights and woke up crying every morning because my body kept remembering the baby before my mind could catch up. Francesca took me to a walk-in clinic to make sure I was healing properly. Eva sat with me during every awkward silence. Neither of them pushed too hard when I could not speak. They just kept making space around me until words came on their own. When I finally told them everything, Eva started crying too. Her mother's face changed in a way I will never forget. Not shock alone. Rage, but controlled. Adult rage. The kind that immediately starts thinking in terms of consequences and options. "They told people you died," she asked. I nodded. "And the baby?" I looked down at the hospital card in my hands. "Gone." Francesca sat very still. "Do you have any paperwork?" "Only this." I showed her the card and the scribbled note from Nurse Francesca. The older woman read it carefully and handed it back like it was evidence in a case that mattered.
"Keep this safe," she said.
I did. That card and that blanket became the only physical things connecting me to my child for years. Francesca Morrison let me stay for 2 weeks. Then she helped me contact a women's support program in Toronto that could place me in transitional housing for young mothers and girls leaving unsafe home situations. Even though I no longer had my baby with me, one counselor there took my case seriously after hearing the full story. She helped me apply for emergency assistance, get copies of my identification, and finish the school term through an alternative program. For the first time, I met adults who did not treat my pain like embarrassment. Still, healing did not come in some clean upward line. At night, I would picture my baby in someone else's arms and feel like my chest was being crushed from inside. Sometimes I would stand in the shower and press my fist against my mouth so the other girls in the house would not hear me sobbing. Sometimes I hated myself for signing anything. Sometimes I hated my parents so much I felt sick. Sometimes, most dangerously, I missed them. That is what people do not understand about emotional abuse. Even when you know what was done to you is terrible, part of you still reaches for the people who trained you to depend on them. A month after I left, I saw proof that the lie had spread. One of my mother's cousins, Aunt Claire, mailed a condolence card to the Whitmore house. Eva found out because her mom knew someone at our church who mentioned how tragic it all was and how my poor parents were bearing it with such grace.
Grace.
That word nearly made me throw up. I imagined casseroles arriving, sympathy hugs, people lowering their voices and speaking about me like some unfortunate girl lost too young. Maybe they said I had been fragile. Maybe they said my parents had done everything they could. Maybe they shook their heads and thanked God it had not happened in their own families. Meanwhile, I was alive, 18 by then, riding the TTC to appointments, trying to finish school, and grieving a child no one allowed me to search for. A counselor named Esther Bell, funny enough, the kindest Esther I would ever know, became the first professional to tell me that what happened to me had names. Coercion, family violence, reproductive control, identity erasure. When she said that last phrase, I stared at her. What does that mean? It means someone took away your place in your own story, she said gently, and replaced it with a version that protected them. I sat there silent for a long time, because that was exactly it. My parents had not just lied. They had rewritten reality with themselves as tragic survivors and me as the sad, shameful daughter whose death conveniently closed every question anyone might ask. By the time I was 19, I had a tiny room in a shared apartment near Danforth, a part-time job at a bakery, and in numbness I wore like winter clothing. Outwardly, I was functioning. Inwardly, I was suspended in the same unfinished grief. I wanted to look for my child, but every route seemed blocked. The adoption had been arranged privately, through channels I had barely understood at 17. I had no names, no address, no certainty that any of my rights still existed. Every time I started asking questions, fear came rushing back. What if I found nothing? What if they hated me? What if my parents found out I was alive and tried to bury me all over again in some new way? So I survived one day at a time. And the terrible thing about survival is that sometimes it looks so ordinary from the outside that nobody realizes how much of you is still underwater. That winter, Eva sat across from me in a Tim Hortons near Broadview and said, "You're still waiting for permission to live." I stared at her over my coffee cup. That sounds dramatic. It's true, she replied. They did something unforgivable, Elena. But they also trained you to keep standing still after they left the room. I looked down. She reached across the table and tapped the hospital card sticking out of my wallet. I carried it everywhere by then, the edges soft from handling. You kept this for a reason. I swallowed hard, because it proves the baby existed. No, she said quietly, because one day you want more than proof. Her words sat in my chest the rest of the night. I did not know it then, but she was right. Because even though the world had accepted my parents' lie, even though relatives mourned me without ever seeing a body, even though my child had been raised somewhere beyond my reach, something in me had not died with the story they told. It had only gone silent. And silence, I would later learn, is not the same thing as disappearance. By my 20th birthday, I had stopped dreaming about my parents forgiving me. Instead, I started dreaming about being remembered correctly. That shift was small, private, almost invisible. But it was the first real crack in the version of me they had built. And one day, years later, a DNA test and a summer reunion would blow that crack wide open. The strangest thing about surviving that kind of betrayal is how ordinary your life can look while the wound stays open. Underneath everything. By 21, I was living in a basement apartment near Woodbine with low ceilings, a tiny galley kitchen, and a radiator that banged at random hours like it was trying to start arguments with the pipes. I worked mornings at the bakery, evenings at a print shop twice a week, and took online courses whenever I could afford them. I kept my world small on purpose. Small felt safer. Small meant fewer questions. Small meant there was less room for lies to catch up to me. Eva was still in my life, steady as ever. She was one of the only people who knew everything. Her mother, Francesca, checked in on me often enough that I never felt completely untethered. Between the three of us, we built something that looked almost like family but gentler, with fewer conditions attached. Still, there were days when grief came back, so hard it knocked the air out of me. A toddler in a grocery store reaching for their mother could do it. A teenager laughing on the subway could do it. Even seeing parents and adult children bicker casually in public could do it, because it reminded me that somewhere in the city, or maybe outside it, maybe in another province, maybe a few neighborhoods away, my own child was growing up without ever knowing I had fought for even a second to hold on. I kept trying, quietly, to trace the adoption. Every now and then I would call agencies, ask careful questions, speak to legal clinics, and hit the same wall again and again. Confidentiality. Sealed records. Limited options. Waiting periods. Changing laws. Every answer sounded polite on the surface and final underneath. One legal aid volunteer named Felix Grant was the first person who explained the landscape without making me feel stupid. He wore rectangular glasses, always had too many papers stacked on his desk, and spoke in a calm, direct way that made complicated things easier to hold. What happened to you took place in a system that protected privacy more than it protected young mothers from pressure, he told me one afternoon in a cramped office near Queen Street West. That doesn't mean it was right. It means it was hard to undo. I nodded slowly. He continued, there may be ways later. Registries. Consent to contact. DNA services, eventually. But right now, without names, you'd be searching in the dark. I looked down at my hands. So I wait. For now, he said gently. You live. You keep records. You stay reachable. And when the law or technology catches up, you make your move. Technology catches up. At the time, those words barely meant anything to me. But I remembered them. Over the years, I kept everything. The yellow blanket. The hospital card with the note from Nurse Francesca. A photocopy of the bus ticket my father gave me when he pushed me out. A church condolence notice someone had clipped and mailed anonymously to Eva years later, where my parents had thanked the community for their prayers during the tragic loss of our beloved daughter Elena. Beloved. That word sat in black ink under my name like a second crime. I kept that too. Not because I enjoyed torturing myself, but because some part of me knew the truth would need witnesses one day, even if the witnesses were paper. By 25, I had a full-time job at a small insurance office downtown. By 28, I was renting a better apartment in the East End and had stopped jumping every time an unknown number called me. By 30, people who met me through work assumed I was reserved by nature, not because my first family had taught me that visibility was dangerous. I never married. I dated a little, carefully, but trust came to me slowly and left easily. Then, when I was 36, everything changed because of an email. It came on a Wednesday evening in late June, after a long day and a delayed streetcar ride home. I was standing at my kitchen counter in socks, eating takeout noodles straight from the container, when I checked the junk folder on my laptop for a missing work receipt. That was when I saw it. Subject line. I think we might be related. My first thought was scam. My second thought was that my body had somehow already recognized danger before my mind caught up because I went cold all over. I clicked. The message was short. Hi. My name is Eloise Mercer. I know this is a strange message, but I matched with you very closely through a DNA ancestry service. I was adopted at birth in Toronto and have been trying to understand my biological family. I don't want to upset you if this is unwanted, but the results suggest you may be my mother. I hope I'm not hurting you by reaching out. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. My mother, not a cousin, not a distant relation, not maybe. Not likely. My mother. For years, I had imagined every possible version of this moment. A phone call, a letter, a lawyer, a dead end. Nothing had prepared me for seeing the word mother written by my child with such care, as if she was afraid of damaging me by naming the truth. I do not know how long I sat there. Eventually, I called Eva. She answered on the second ring. Hey, what's wrong? I could barely get the words out. Someone found me. Silence. Then immediately. Who? I looked at the screen again, even though I had already memorized every line. My child. Eva inhaled sharply. Elena. I think it's real. Read it to me.
So I did.
By the time I finished, I was crying hard enough that the words blurred. Eva's own voice had gone shaky. Okay. First, breathe. Second, do not answer too fast. Not because you shouldn't, but because you deserve 1 minute to feel this before panic takes over. I laughed and sobbed at the same time. Too late. Fair, she said softly. Do you want me there? Yes. She arrived 40 minutes later with a box of Timbits and the expression of someone entering a holy place and a crime scene at the same time. We sat at my tiny dining table with the laptop open between us. What are you afraid of most? She asked quietly. I stared at the email. That it's real. She frowned. You're afraid it's real? I nodded. And I'm afraid it isn't. Both. Eva understood immediately. Because if it was real, then the child I had lost was suddenly a person with an adult voice and an actual life and memories and opinions. Real hope meant real risk. But if it was not real, I would have to grieve all over again in a new shape. I wrote back that night. My hands shook so badly, I had to retype the message twice. Hi, Eloise. You are not upsetting me. I've waited many years for the possibility of hearing from you, though I never knew if that day would come. If you're comfortable, I'd like to keep talking. And if the DNA results are what they seem to be, then yes, I believe I am your biological mother. I stared at the words biological mother for a long time before sending them. They felt both heartbreakingly small and impossibly huge. She replied the next morning. And from there, the silence of 20 years began to open. We started with messages, then long emails, then a phone call a week later. Her voice was lower than I expected, warm and a little careful. She sounded intelligent, grounded, and nothing like the fragile fantasy I had clung to over the years.
Of course she didn't.
She was a full person. 20 years had happened to her without me. My adoptive parents are good people, she told me early in that first call, almost apologetically. I closed my eyes in relief. I'm glad. They told me I was adopted from the beginning. They never hid it. That matters, I said softly. They said if I ever wanted to search, they'd support me. I swallowed around the ache in my throat. I'm grateful for that too. There was a pause. Then she asked the question I had feared and longed for most. Did you give me up because you wanted to? I had promised myself I would never use the first conversation to unload my trauma onto her. I would not make her carry all my grief before she even knew me. But I also knew I would not begin this relationship with a lie. No, I said, voice shaking. I was young. I was pressured. I was isolated. I loved you from the moment I knew you were there. The line went quiet. For one terrible second, I thought I had said too much. Then I heard her cry softly. I always wondered, she whispered. So did I whispered back. We cried together, two strangers connected by blood and loss, and a history neither of us had chosen. Over the next month, she told me about her life. Her name was Eloise Mercer. Her adoptive parents, Elliot and Esther Mercer, lived in Ajax, not far at all from where some of my extended family had spent years hosting birthdays, weddings, and barbecues. She had gone to university in Ottawa, moved back to the GTA for work, and recently taken one of those DNA tests half out of curiosity, half because she wanted medical history and maybe, if she was honest, answers that had always hovered around the edge of her life. Wait, I said during one call, sitting bolt upright. Ajax.
Yeah.
My mind raced. Ajax was close enough that family circles overlapped all the time without anyone noticing. Scarborough, Pickering, Ajax, Whitby. People moved through those spaces for sports tournaments, church events, school programs, summer picnics, fundraising dinners. Not constantly, but enough. Then she said something else that made my skin go cold. My mom told me once that when I was little, an older woman at a community fundraiser said I had familiar eyes. She laughed about it for years. I gripped the phone harder. Did she say who? I think she said the woman's name was Claire? Or maybe Frances. I don't know. Why? I looked straight ahead at the wall. Because Aunt Claire was my mother's cousin. Because familiar eyes had brushed right past the truth and never recognized it. Because my child had grown up practically in the shadow of the same family that had buried me, and none of them had known. The closer Eloise and I got, the clearer one thing became. I could not keep living inside the lie my parents had built. Not now. Not after all this. Not while my daughter was alive and asking where she came from. That summer, she asked if we could meet in person. I said yes, then spent 3 days terrified. We chose a quiet cafe in the Distillery District on a Saturday afternoon. Neutral ground. Public, but not crowded enough to feel suffocating. I arrived 20 minutes early and still felt late inside my own skin. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped. Then she walked in. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back loosely, a green jacket, nervous eyes, and my face in certain angles so suddenly and so unmistakably that I almost stopped breathing. Not exactly my face. Her own. But pieces of me were there. The shape around the eyes. The line of the mouth when she was trying not to cry. Something in the way she held tension in her shoulders.
She saw me at the same second.
We both froze. Then she smiled through tears and said, "Hi." That one word shattered me more gently than anything ever had. I stood up too fast, nearly knocked the chair back, and then we were hugging. The first hug lasted only a few seconds because we were both overwhelmed and self-conscious and trying not to make a scene. The second hug, a little later, lasted longer and felt more real. We sat down. We laughed awkwardly.
We cried.
We wiped our faces. We apologized for crying. Then we laughed because apologizing for crying was obviously inherited. "I brought something," I said finally. From my bag, I took out the yellow baby blanket, folded carefully after all those years, and the hospital card. Eloise touched the blanket with both hands like it was fragile history. "You kept this." "I kept everything I had." Then I showed her the note on the back of the card. "For your heart. Don't let anyone tell you this child was never real." She read it once, then again. When she looked up, her eyes were full.
"You really wanted me," she said.
I nodded because speaking was no longer possible. That day changed both of us. From then on, we moved carefully but honestly. She met Eva. I eventually met Elliot and Esther Mercer, the couple who had raised her, and I will be grateful to them for the rest of my life. There was no ugliness there, no competition over who was the real mother. They were her parents. I was her mother too, in a different, wounded, undeniable way. Good people can make room for complexity without turning it into war. One evening at the Mercer's house, Elliot asked me quietly, "Do your parents know you're alive?" I looked down into my tea.
"Not
officially." Esther Mercer frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "they told the family. I died when I was 17. Most of the extended relatives probably still believe that." The silence at that table was so complete. I could hear the fridge humming from the kitchen. Eloise looked from me to her parents in
shock.
"They what?" I had not told her the full scale of that
"Part yet."
Not because I was hiding it, but because each truth had arrived in stages.
"So I told them then."
Everything. The pregnancy. The pressure. The hospital. The papers. The bus ticket. The lie. The condolence card. Eloise went pale, then angry in a way that made her look so much like me at my most controlled that it startled me. "They erased you," she said. "Yes." "And everyone just believed it?" "They had no reason not to." She stood and paced once across the dining room, hand pressed to her forehead. "My God." Esther Mercer put a hand over her mouth. Elliot's face had gone hard in that quiet Canadian way some men have when rage becomes extremely still. Finally, he asked, "What do you want to do now?" The answer came out before I fully planned it. "I want my life back. Not money first. Not revenge first. My life." Felix Grant re-entered the picture a week later, when Eva insisted I stop trying to handle this emotionally explosive situation with nothing but old papers and nerve. He had his own small practice by then, still downtown, still surrounded by stacks of files. After reviewing everything, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You have two separate matters here. One is emotional truth. The other is practical exposure." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means your parents may not face legal punishment for every moral crime they committed, especially after this much time. But lies of this scale leave traces. Church circles, estate paperwork, family communications, possibly tax or beneficiary records if they used your death formally anywhere. And, at minimum, you have the right to tell the truth." Eloise, sitting beside me, said quietly, "She should tell the family." Felix nodded once. "If you do it in a place where denial becomes difficult." That was when the family reunion entered the conversation. Every August, one branch of my mother's side hosted a large reunion at a rented community hall near Pickering, sometimes with an outdoor barbecue area, if the weather held. Cousins came from all over southern Ontario. People brought potato salad, Nanaimo bars, folding chairs, and gossip. There were children running around, old photos on display boards, name tags for in-laws and new partners, and endless retellings of stories no one fully remembered the same way. I had gone to those reunions as a child. Then, after my death, my parents kept going. Felix looked at me carefully. Do they still attend? Yes. Then that may be your moment. The idea terrified me so badly that for 3 nights, I could not sleep properly. Because it was one thing to imagine telling the truth. It was another thing to walk into a room full of people who had mourned you, hugged your parents, maybe cried over casseroles and sympathy cards, and force them to confront the fact that they had been manipulated for 20 years. What if they think I'm cruel? I asked Eva during one of our planning sessions at my apartment. She stared at me. Elena, your parents staged your social death. I know, but these are older relatives, church people, traditional people. What if they think I should have reached out sooner or stayed quiet or handled it privately? Eva gave me a look. And this is why they got away with it for so long. Because they counted on your decency to protect their image. She was right. Still, I did not want theatrics for the sake of drama. I wanted something stronger than yelling. I wanted evidence, structure, sequence.
Truth that would stand on its own.
So we prepared. I gathered every document I had kept. Felix helped me organize timelines. Eloise printed her DNA match results and ancestry charts. The Mercers found the old adoption correspondence they were legally allowed to share on their side, enough to establish dates and placement details without violating anything improper. Eva tracked down the anonymous condolence clipping and the original church bulletin mention through archived newsletters. And then, unexpectedly, the final piece arrived through Connor. He found me first on social media. His message came late one night, blunt and shaken. Elena, if this is really you, answer me. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. It's me. He called immediately. I almost did not pick up, but I did. He sounded older, rougher, and far less certain of himself than the protected younger brother I remembered. Oh my God, he said the second I answered.
It's really you.
Yes. He was silent for a moment then. Mom and Dad said you died. I know. I thought, his voice cracked. I thought they were telling the truth. I sat down slowly on my sofa. How old were you when they told you? 14. Young enough to be lied to. Old enough to remember. He kept breathing hard into the phone like he had run upstairs. Eloise found me last week. He stopped. Your daughter found me online. I closed my eyes. Yes. I didn't know. He sounded sick. I swear to you, Elena, I didn't know. For the first time in years, I believed a Whitmore immediately. Connor told me something that made the coming confrontation even sharper. About 6 months after I was kicked out, he had overheard our parents arguing in the kitchen. My mother was anxious because Aunt Claire wanted to donate to a memorial bench in my name. My father had said no memorial, no grave, no plaque, because anything physical invites questions. That was why there had never been a funeral I could trace. No cemetery. No visible marker. They wanted grief without evidence. Connor also still had something else, an old cassette recording from the family camcorder era that he had digitized years later out of nostalgia. Most of it was random family footage, but near the end there was audio from a kitchen conversation accidentally captured after someone thought the camera was off. My parents' voices. My father saying, "Once she's gone, this whole thing dies with her." My mother replying, "Then we tell people what we have to." The recording was muffled, but clear enough. When Connor sent me the file, I sat in stunned silence. Then I forwarded it to Felix. He listened once and said, "This won't prove every detail alone. But in that room, with your presence, the documents, the DNA, and the timeline, it will collapse them."
Collapse them.
That was the word. The reunion was on the second Saturday in August. The week leading up to it felt unreal. Eloise Mercer and I spoke every day. Sometimes about strategy. Sometimes about nothing. I think we both needed the ordinary conversations to balance the fact that we were about to walk into the wreckage of the lie that had shaped both our lives. On Thursday night, she came over with coffee and sat cross-legged on my floor while papers were spread across the table. "Are you sure you want me there?" she asked softly. I looked at her. "You are the reason I can walk in at all." She blinked hard and smiled. Then she said, "Good, because I'm coming." I laughed for the first time that day. Saturday arrived hot and bright. The reunion was at a community center hall just off the highway in Pickering, one of those multipurpose buildings with a parking lot full of minivans and folding signs taped near the entrance. When we pulled in, I could already see people carrying foil trays inside. Kids ran between cars. Someone had set up lawn chairs near the grass. Through the open hall doors, I heard laughter and the clatter of serving spoons against aluminum pans. My chest felt so tight, I thought I might be sick. Eva touched my shoulder from the front seat. She had insisted on driving. "You don't have to do this alone." "I know." In the back seat, Eloise Mercer reached forward and squeezed my hand. "Ready?" she asked. "No, I thought." "Yes," I said. We walked in together. For the first 10 seconds, no one noticed. Then Aunt Claire turned from the dessert table, looked straight at me, and dropped an entire tray of butter tarts. The room changed all at once.
Gasps.
Silence. A child being hushed. Someone whispering, "What the?" I kept walking. My parents were near the far end of the hall beside a display board of old family photos. My mother was wearing a pale blue blouse and her reunion smile. My father had a paper plate in one hand. They both looked up at the disturbance in stages, first annoyed, then confused, then empty with shock. I have never seen human color drain so fast. My mother's plate slipped from her fingers. My father did not move at all. Beside me, Eloise Mercer held her shoulders straight. I stopped in the middle of the room. No microphone was needed. Silence was louder than amplification. Aunt Claire was the first to speak. Her voice came out thin and trembling. "Elena?" I turned toward her. "Yes, Aunt Claire. I'm alive." Several people made the same involuntary sound at once, something between a gasp and a prayer. Then all eyes snapped toward my parents. My mother recovered first, or tried to. "This is not the place," she said sharply. I looked at her and, for the first time in my life, felt no fear. Only clarity. "No," I replied. "This is exactly the place. Because you made all of them part of your lie." My father found his voice next. "You need to leave." I almost laughed. After 20 years, and that was still his instinct. Remove. Isolate. Silence. Instead, I said calmly, "Before I do anything, everyone here deserves to know that my parents told the family I died after complications at 17. They did that after forcing me to surrender my baby and throwing me out." The room erupted instantly.
What?
"No. My God. That's impossible." My mother stepped forward, face tight with fury. "She's confused. She was unstable at the time, and—" "Don't," I said louder. She stopped. I took out the first document, the church condolence notice. "You told the church I had died," I said. "You accepted sympathy. You let relatives mourn me. You erased me because you didn't want questions about my baby." Then I held up the hospital card. This was kept from the day I gave birth. My voice shook for the first time then, but I did not stop. And I did not come alone. I turned to Eloise Mercer. The whole room followed my gaze. She stepped forward beside me, steady, pale, brave. "This is my daughter," I said. "The child my parents tried to erase with me." If the room had gone silent before, now it became something deeper than silence. A kind of collective disbelief, so intense it felt physical. Aunt Claire sat down hard in the nearest chair. One of my cousins covered her mouth and started crying. My mother looked at Eloise Mercer like she was staring at a ghost who had learned how to walk. My father's lips parted, but nothing came out. Eloise Mercer took a breath and spoke clearly. "I found Elena through a DNA ancestry match," she said. "I was adopted at birth in Toronto. I grew up less than an hour from here. Some of you may have met me over the years without knowing who I was." Murmurs spread through the hall like wind through dry leaves. Then I gave Felix's prepared copies to 3 of the loudest, most central relatives in the room, the kind of people no family story can survive without once they turn against it. Aunt Claire, Uncle Felix, Cousin Esther, DNA charts, date timelines, the condolence notice, the copied note from the hospital card, the adoption date correlation. My mother tried again. "This girl has been manipulated," she said, pointing at me as if I were still 17 and cornered in a kitchen. She disappeared years ago, and now she shows up with documents and accusations because she wants attention and money. Money. Even then, she could not imagine that truth might be worth something on its own. Connor stepped forward from the back of the room before I could answer. He had arrived late and stood there holding his phone. "No," he said, voice shaking. "I was there. Not for all of it, but enough. And I have something else." Everyone turned. My parents looked at him in open horror. Connor connected his phone to the small portable speaker near the photo board, a reunion setup someone had used earlier for background music. Then he pressed play. Static. Kitchen sounds. Then my father's voice, younger but unmistakable. "Once she's gone, this whole thing dies with her." My mother's voice followed, lower and tense. "Then we tell people what we have to." The room went dead still. My mother made a choke sound. "Connor, turn that off."
He didn't.
The clip ended on silence. No one moved for a second. Then Aunt Claire stood up, trembling with rage I had never seen in her. "You told us she died," she said to my parents. "We cried with you. We sent flowers. We held memorial prayers." My father straightened, trying one last time to reach for authority. "This is a private family matter." Uncle Felix barked back. "It stopped being private when you lied to all of us for 20 years. That was the turn. Not subtle, not gradual, a real shift. People who had once stood politely around my parents at church potlucks and birthdays were now stepping away from them, looking at them differently. Looking at me differently too, but not with suspicion anymore. With shock, grief, and something close to shame that they had been used. A cousin I barely remembered whispered, "We thought of you every Christmas." Another relative said through tears, "Your mother wore black for months." The cruelty of that almost made me dizzy. My mother had performed grief as theater while I was trying to survive in basement apartments and buses and part-time jobs across the same city. My mother's face finally cracked. Not into remorse. Into panic. "You don't understand," she said, voice rising. "She was pregnant. She was out of control. She would have ruined everything." "There it is," Eva muttered beside me. I looked at my mother and said quietly, "Everything except me, apparently. My father tried a different tactic. You were a child. We made a difficult decision." "No," I replied. "You made a cruel one. And then you turned it into a funeral." Eloise Mercer stepped forward then, and I will never forget her voice. "You didn't just erase her," she said. "You erased me too." That landed harder than anything else. Because suddenly this was not only about what they had done to a pregnant teenager. It was about what they had stolen from a child grown into an adult. The entire room felt it. My mother sat down abruptly in a folding chair like her legs had given out. My father looked around the room and seemed to realize, finally, that there was no angle left where he still controlled the story. No one believed them anymore. Not after seeing me. Not after seeing Eloise. Not after hearing the recording. Not after the DNA charts and the printed dates and the note and the clipping and the simple, devastating fact that I was alive in front of him. For the first time in my life, the truth stood in the center of the family, and my parents were the ones with nowhere to hide. After that, the room turned into smaller circles of aftermath. Some relatives came to me crying, apologizing, touching my hands, saying things like, "We didn't know," and "I am so sorry," and "You should have been with us all these years." Their apologies did not fix anything, but I accepted the honest ones because they belonged to the truth, not performance. Aunt Claire hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and kept repeating, "I asked about you. I asked so many times." "I know," I whispered, because I did know. That had been the problem.
People had asked.
My parents had just buried every question. Connor cried openly. Eloise Mercer sat with Esther Mercer and Eva for a while, answering relatives' stunned questions with more grace than anyone her age should have needed. My parents left before dessert. Not dramatically. No shouting exit. Just a quiet, ugly retreat. My father walked out first, jaw tight, refusing to look at anyone. My mother followed a minute later with her purse clutched too hard, and her face collapsed into something that finally looked less like control and more like exposure. No one stopped them. That was consequence, too. After 20 years of managing every room, they had to cross a hall full of people who knew exactly what they were. The days after the reunion were almost as emotional as the event itself. Calls started coming in from relatives who wanted to speak, apologize, explain, reconnect. Some I answered. Some I did not. Boundaries mattered now in a way they never had when I was young. A week later, Connor visited my apartment with coffee and a bakery box like peace offerings from a younger brother trying to rebuild from rubble. I should have questioned more, he said quietly. You were a kid, I replied. I still should have. I looked at him for a long moment. Then questioned now. That's what matters. He nodded, eyes wet. As for Eloise Mercer and me, the reunion did not magically erase 20 years. Nothing could. We still had to build something day by day, conversation by conversation, holiday by holiday. There were awkward moments, tender moments, questions that came late at night, memories neither of us could supply for the other. But there was also relief and humor and a strange, beautiful familiarity that kept appearing where we least expected it. We both hated celery in soup. We both cried when angry. We both apologized too fast and then got annoyed at ourselves for it. The first Thanksgiving we spent together happened that October at the Mercer's house in Ajax. Elliot carved the turkey like it was a serious engineering problem. Esther Mercer kept adding more dishes to the table than any reasonable number of people could finish. Eva came too because at that point she was family whether blood said so or not. At one point during dessert, Eloise looked around the table and smiled. This is the first time family has felt simple, she said. I nearly cried into the pumpkin pie. My parents tried contacting me twice after the reunion. The first was a letter from my mother, for pages long and almost entirely about how humiliated they had been, how I could have handled matters more discreetly, how certain nuances had been misunderstood, and how I should not poison Connor and the extended family against them. I read it once, and then handed it to Felix. He looked up afterward and said dryly, "Interesting. For pages and not one real apology." Exactly. The second was a voicemail from my father asking to speak calmly, adult to adult. Adult to adult. As though adulthood was something he had invited me into rather than denied me when I needed it most. I did not answer either one. Some people call that unforgiveness. I call it hygiene. You do not reopen a wound just because the knife asks politely. Months later, I learned the rest of the consequences through family channels. My parents stopped attending several church and extended family events after people began treating them with the caution usually reserved for habitual liars and emotional predators. My mother lost her place on a community fundraising committee because no one trusted her public sincerity anymore. My father, retired by then, found that old friends no longer returned calls the same way. Their social world shrank. Their control shrank with it. More importantly, they lost access to my story. They no longer got to speak about me as tragedy. They no longer got to decide whether relatives knew I existed. They no longer got to hide Eloise Mercer behind my supposed grave. As for me, I did not suddenly become someone untouched by the past. Healing is not a clean movie ending. Some nights, the 17-year-old version of me still wakes up inside my chest and remembers the hospital bassinet gone from the room. Some holidays still ache around the edges. Sometimes I still grieve the years I should have had with my daughter and did not. But my life is mine now in a way it never was before. I am no longer the girl in the basement waiting for permission to exist. I am no longer the daughter spoken about in the past tense while still breathing. I am no longer the family shame they buried to protect a lie. I am Elena Whitmore. I live in Toronto. I survived. I was found, and the child they tried to erase walked back into the family with me, alive and undeniable. The summer after the reunion, Eloise Mercer and I went to Center Island together on a bright Sunday morning. We took the ferry with iced coffees in our hands and let the lake wind ruin our hair. At one point we sat on a bench facing the water, quiet for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because not every silence needs to be lonely. Then she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder and said, "You know what's weird?
What?
I grew up thinking I came from a blank space." My throat tightened. "You didn't." She smiled. "I know. I came from someone who kept the proof." I looked out at the water, so I would not start crying immediately. After a moment, I said, "I'm sorry it took us so long." She took my hand. "It wasn't you." That mattered more than she probably realized. Because for years, shame had tried to attach itself to me like a second skin. My parents had wanted me to carry the stain of what they did, while they wore sympathy like clean clothing. But the truth had finally rearranged everything. Now, when relatives tell the story, they tell the right one. They say my parents lied. They say I was forced out. They say the daughter they thought was dead walked into a reunion with the child she never stopped loving. And every time that story is told correctly, a small missing piece of me settles back into place. From everything I went through, I learned that some families will destroy one person just to protect their image, and silence only helps people like that stay powerful. If someone erased your voice, please remember this. The truth may take years, but when it finally stands up in the open, it can give you your life back. Before I close the story, I really want to ask you something. If you had been one of those relatives at the reunion, what would have shocked you more? The fact that the parents lied for 20 years, or the fact that the daughter came back with the child they tried to erase? And one more thing, do you think some betrayals deserve distance forever, even when the people who hurt you are your own parents? If you've ever gone through something similar or you want to share your own story, write it in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends, like the video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.